Okay, here we are back on the Syren. You can see I got gun ports painted and everything set up. Planked the bulwarks on one side. All the notches cut out for all the gun ports and sweep ports. Pretty happy with it. A little bit of gappage up here that I'm not overly thrilled with, but I think I can work with it. Did that so I can figure out what I'm doing and how to do it. So now I'm ready to work on the other side. First thing you notice, you gotta do, well, first thing, this board here is a little funky in its shape. I'm not worried about it because for one thing, I'm going to glue another piece of wood behind it to clamp it down and shape it the rest. But more importantly, it gets a second layer of wood over it so it'll never be seen once it's shaped and faired. There's 3 whales here that are double planked, and as well as the shear plank up here. First thing I do is I take a piece of wood, one of these 8-inch boards, trim it to shape on the end, and I bend it around to where I want to have that board run to. In this case, I'm running it to this frame right here. So take it, I figure it's going to be about that long. Give it a mark here and cut it square. Then, since that's a big curve to go around, I'll take it, I'll soak it in some hot water, and then put it around a form. In this case, just this handy dandy glass jar I have here. Have it already taken place here to form it. This is more of a curve than I need. There's going to be some spring back, and then I can always flatten out a little bit more as I glue it on. So once that's ready to go on, I'll come back, and then we'll go to trimming it to go around this port here. So this isn't a gun port, I forget what it's called, but it has to be trimmed to go around here. As it goes on, I need to trim it so there's a little bit of red showing on the face. Once I get that piece trimmed in place, then I can come back to the next one and sort of same thing, but this one doesn't need to be soaked. It'll be low enough, shallow enough curve that I can just put it on. And I do not believe it's going to need any trimming at all. And going on back, make sure you're working from bow to stern, because you start from the stern and come forward, you're going to end up cutting these ones here to length to butt up against the plank. Butting up against or coming up against the gun port or sweep port's one thing, but coming up against you get fudge factor, but coming up against the plank, you got to get it to fit. So from bow to stern, on the stern here, you just let them fly along and trim them off later. So once that thing's ready to trim up, I'll come back. Okay, I have my piece here. It's all shaped. It's still a little damp, but it's all shaped. Fits in here. Minimal tension on it. Nice curve to it. Things is all fair and nice, especially when I get that second. When I take it accounting, I'll put a second layer of wood on the whale. So next thing I need to do is figure out where this needs to be trimmed out for this port. And I usually just trim it right to the edge, or mark it right to the edge of the port, and then cut it to fit. So with that, just use an X-Acto knife is all I use. A couple nips, and then just trim out for this one just the barest sliver of wood. And when you put it on, what you're looking for is just a hair of that red to show around. In real life, the gun ports would have sat in to seal up from the water and the weather, rather than just being on the surface. So it looks like my depth is fine. I just need to get a little bit more length on it. So this is, I believe, basswood. It trims up really easily. it can be hard to see exactly where you're at in relation to the port itself. Which means it gets to be really easy to overcut. Make it too big. I've done that a few times. I'll just go back and shim it in around the port if need be. If I end up being a little bit shallow on my cut, I'll just go back and I'll just trim down, straighten it out, and touch up the red where I'll need to touch it up afterwards. So there you go. I'll keep doing that, and that'll happen all along here. I think these next ones I put on can just go in. Another thing I've been doing is on the bottom of the boards, I'll go ahead and just put a Sharpie along it so I can get a caulking line. And the same thing on one end. That way, oops, wrong cap. That way, when you get everything together, you end up with this nice black line here. That'll look like the ship's been caulked and tarred right there. And since this is getting a light stain up here, that should stand out pretty good. So I'll keep working on that and come back as I move along. Okay, just real quick, I have the part glued in. I'm just using these little tiny clamps to hold it in place. For glue, I'm just using, not advertising this, I'm just using Titebond wood glue. Good strong glue, hold it together. Be just fine, use it on several kits already. These clamps, nothing fancy about them. I think I bought 20 of them for about 11 bucks off of the Great Cloud store that I shall not mention here, but its initials are Amazon. They're not overly strong, but plenty strong enough for doing this. I found with a heavier clamp is actually leaving marks in this beech wood or basswood, whatever it is. I think it's beech. Anyways, that's first plank glued in. It's not a perfect fit, but that's what sanding and fairing's for. I expect to sand off just a little bit of the whole surface to smooth it out before I do my stain anyway. But with that one, I can move on to these next pieces and just work on down the frame. First one row, then the next, and keep working. I can stagger them out as I do it. But to put in perspective, this other side took me a better part of a week just to put that planking on in the few hours I have to work on it. When you bend the wood, you're going to end up with some breaks. That's inevitable. Don't throw those away. This little piece can go between a sweep port and a gun port. The longer piece is long enough to go between two gun ports when I get to that point. Still be used, just not where I was going to put it on the front, on the bow. So I'm going to continue on with my planking and come on back as I move along. Back on the framing here, or planking. Started making this piece here, this plank. It'll go right in here. Cutting around all the different openings. I made some marks here so I can line it up, so I have to keep lining it up with the first opening, and started cutting the holes. I've marked off the edge of each opening with a little light pencil tick, and then for each one, just come in here with my X-Acto knife, find the opening, cut down a shallow notch. So these are going to be a shallower one. Separate the chunk of wood out and see how it fits, see how it looks. Now I know it's going to be too narrow, so I'll have to widen it a bit. But once I get that to depth, then I can start working on widening it. I can use my little file here. This is a small square file. Flatten it off. And just sneak up on the opening. First thing I want to do is I want to get the depth, which is more than adequate there. And then I can go for the width. You can also just make your cut marks outside your tick marks, so you can get your width established first. It just depends. If I'm doing deeper ones, I usually try to go for the width first. That looks like my width is pretty good. Get my file here. Let's see if I can square them up a bit. And this is where these marks here come in line for alignment, because I don't have to come back up here every time and make sure it fits. See, that's good on that one. I could do a little bit more in this one corner here. Just to square it off. And then when you get up above this, start putting these ones in between, you can start seeing how that square looks, and get in here with a little X-Acto knife and just start making sure everything's square. Don't be afraid to shim it in if you have to. After the fact, like I did on one of these over here. This one here I shimmed the bottom up. This one here I shimmed all the way around and drew in my marks for the caulking. I'll continue shaping this piece and come back when I glue it on. Okay, that looks good. Got a good reveal around it. Everything seems to be lining up. I can get this one glued in place. And continue on. Sorry about that. I already have a line here for the extent of where I'm going. Don't worry about your gluing over paint. It's an acrylic paint, a water-based glue. They'll blend. I try to go along and scrape out the excess glue as I put the piece in. Saves on the cleanup and the fitting later. Make sure as you clamp them down, you're pushing them towards the bottom of the vessel so that you get as tight as a fit as you can get. If you don't clean the glue on the top, what happens is then you have to scrape it off with a knife before you put the next plank on. Apparently I didn't put glue all the way down where I thought. No big deal. Oh, I have another line right there is why. The board underneath. Don't have to go overly heavy on the glue, but don't be stingy either. You need enough on there to be able to coat it and make it stick. But not so much that it oozes out all over the place and wastes it. Just one more clamp in here, and that one can dry. And then go on to the next board. I'm going to continue planking on this layer, and I'll come back when I start to get the next layer where I'm having to trim each board individually. So I'm back. I've pretty much used every single clamp I have to hold these boards in place, but they all but the front one are dry. I go ahead and take them off. And now you can see second 1/8 inch board is in place. It's all notched out all the way from stem to stern. Every section I do next is just between gun ports. So it actually kind of speeds up here. And looks like every single one is going to need to be adjusted, obviously. Except for the last, which is just in there. So I'll continue on doing that. Everything is basically a lather, rinse, or yeah, lather, rinse, repeat. In that, mark the length, cut it, notch it, and glue it on. And one of these days, I may actually have good lighting in here as well. But everybody's got to have their dreams. A little bit too long. And go on and just shave off just a hair. Try it again. Looks like that'll fit. Find the best thing you can do is just use X-Acto knife to cut off the little bit of hairs you get on either end. And like before, mark out where the port is. Cut it out and glue the piece on. Excuse me while I change glasses so I can see this a little better. The eyes are not as young as they used to be. Looks good. Fake the caulking joint. Lose track of which is the bow and which is the stern. And remember to put a little arrow to which way is the bow. glue. Get the part in place. And throw a couple of clamps on it. Making sure it sits down tight to the one below it. So I'll do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more times for this layer. And get a piece for the bow getting bent into place. Okay, so I'm just about done with this side, but this is taking an awful long time, so that's how Millennial Farmer wants. Let's see if this works. Holy cow, it worked. It's all done. Guess I can move on to the next step, which is, let me get into here, step 2, before the initial planking is complete on the sides of the hull, the cover of the stern should be planked over. So that would be sanding this down and planking the stern. So I'll get that sanded down and come back and do the actual planking.